From quitting just before the final round to the greatest woman in MMA giving up, there have been a lot of UFC fighters who just couldn't fight the match anymore. Let's check out some of the UFC fighters who gave up inside the octagon, starting with Chris Curtis. It's not only very embarrassing but also shocking when someone gives up in the middle of a fight. That doesn't change the fact that instances like these always leave a black mark on the fighter's career. Just like it did when Chris Curtis gave up at UFC Fight Night 208. It was a match against the legendary Jack Hermanson, and fans were super excited to see the two face each other off in the octagon.
There's that single. Wait for the sweep. The tree top in.
Chris is a great fighter in the middleweight division and has some pretty extraordinary boxing skills, but Hermanson is equally fierce. What made this whole thing even worse is the fact that Chris was having a pretty remarkable winning streak. He had won 8 times in a row, and people expected him to win this time around too, especially when most of those 8 wins were knockouts. Unfortunately for Chris, the Joker was a little too much for him to handle in the match, and was much stronger than him or his fans had anticipated. Hermanson was spectacular in the whole fight, and Chris found it hard to land a single blow, whereas Hermanson kept dominating the fight.
Octagon doesn't allow Chris to get on the inside, and that's what he wants. Chris is the shorter guy, predominantly uses...
This went on for a while before Chris got so frustrated that he gave up on the fight, handing the victory to Hermanson. Now, he could have continued and maybe the outcome would have been different, but I guess we'll never know for sure. Just like with this next fighter, I'm referring to BJ Penn. Okay, this one is kinda old, but it's still talked about whenever someone talks about Penn's career. But at least in Penn's case, he had a valid reason behind giving up, one that most people understood. So that's respectable, right? It was back in January 2009 at UFC 94, and Penn was going to face off Georges St-Pierre in the octagon.
Georges St-Pierre is wincing his eye. His right eye might have got poked there.
He's bleeding out of that eye too.
The match was for the UFC Welterweight Championship, and although Pierre had won their previous match by split decision, this rematch was going to decide the true winner. Fans were super excited for this match, but no one could have expected the way the fight ended. You see, Penn didn't come out for the final round. After 4 rounds of the match, he refused to continue fighting for the 5th round, which was going to decide who was going to win and move forward. Not only did this surprise literally everyone, but Penn also got a lot of harsh criticism for this move, because at that time, no one knew why he had done it, and we all just assumed that he was scared or something, but that wasn't the case. A while after the fight, he revealed that he couldn't continue the fight because of an injury that he had received earlier, and how he was advised not to continue. St-Pierre was made the winner of the fight, obviously, and I hope Penn got treated for whatever injury he'd gotten.
Again, BJ just pushes off the hips with his feet, stands right up.
That slam might give the advantage.
But let me tell you about this next fighter who had some other reasons. It's time to talk about Edmen Shahbazyan. Edmen Shahbazyan is regarded as one of the most fierce fighters in the UFC, and that's just a fact. No one can counter me on that. I mean, at a point he was literally called invincible. He was undefeated and was regarded as the future UFC champion. But this one moment from his career when he just decided to give up in the middle of a fight will always be remembered as one of the worst moments from the fighter's career. And not to mention how after 2019, he's kinda lost his charm, the one he used to have in the earlier years. It was a fight against Derek Brunson at UFC Fight Night 173, and fans couldn't wait to see who was going to walk away victorious.
So you want to continue?
Yeah. Yes, we're
Hey, stop. Let them do their thing. I'll talk to them.
Throughout the whole fight, it was obvious who the more dominant player was, and it sure wasn't Edmen. He got served with one of the worst defeats of his career, which would go on to become part of his losing streak. It was the 3rd round when things really changed, and the fans were left shocked at how their favorite fighter was acting in the octagon. Before the 3rd round started, you could tell that Edmen was having a hard time continuing continuing. But he pushed himself and started fighting in the third round. But there was less fighting and more of nothing from his side. It was pretty obvious that he had given up because he didn't even try to deliver a punch or defend himself. Just like this next fighter on my list, it's none other than Amanda Nunes. Amanda Nunes needs no introduction. She's a legend. But this one thing that she did really shocked and disappointed fans during her fight with Juliana Pena at UFC 269.
She's exhausted. Amanda's tired.
She's exhausted and she's hurt.
Big deep press from Nunes.
Both these fighters are equally fierce, so people were hella excited to see who wins the match. But what came next was so unexpected that it had our jaws on the floor. Also, Nunes started off strong with her signature style. Her opponent did a really good job in defending herself, to the point where Nunes was visibly tired, and that was the time for Pena to shine. It got to the point where in the second round, Nunes was literally gasping for air as Pena started her offense. At this point, Nunes had no energy left and decided it was time to give up. As she was dragged to the mat, Pena ended up winning the fight and Nunes lost the fight because of pure exhaustion.
She's got a turn over. She's got a choker. She's got
Unlike this next fighter, I'm talking about Darren Till. It's been a while since we've seen Till do anything extraordinary in the octagon, so this move that he pulled wasn't exactly shocking to most of us. From being called a future champion and people having so many hopes for him, to being just another fighter who's basically just struggling at this point, it was a fight against Dricus du Plessis at UFC 282. Although this was his lowest ranked opponent since he had moved up to middleweight, the fight didn't really go in his favor at all. The match was going fine, but it was the third round when Till did something that led to a lot of criticism being thrown his way. You see, in the third round, he decided to tap out to a jaw crank, just a few seconds after the round had started. Now, this move is very looked down upon in MMA circles and led to a lot of criticism. And obviously, du Plessis ended up winning the fight as well. It was very obvious that Till had given up because he didn't even try to fight the choke and just surrendered. Just like this next fighter in today's video, I'm talking about Glover Teixeira. When Glover Teixeira gave up in his fight against Yuri Prochazka at UFC 275, not only was it shocking to the whole UFC world, but also very unlike the fighter. He's a very feared fighter, but looks like even the most feared ended up giving up when it came to Prochazka. The fight between the two was just as fans had hoped. Pretty epic and a treat for the eyes. The whole fight went on good, with both the fighters being hurt pretty badly but continuing on with the match until they had a winner. But in the fifth round, it was pretty obvious that Teixeira was way more exhausted than his opponent. That only became clearer when he didn't even try to defend the choke, and he just tapped out immediately. And that was all about UFC fighters who gave up inside the octagon.